Hey everyone, ready for another deep dive. Today we're tackling something I think we all struggle with sometimes, and that's sounding smooth and natural when we speak English, like even in those tricky situations.
It could definitely be tough.
Totally. So we're bringing in a pro. We're going to be learning from Vanessa from the YouTube channel, Speak English with Vanessa, using tons of real life examples.
And what I love about her approach is that she doesn't just tell you the phrase, but she shows you how it's used in real conversations. And let me tell you, it can be pretty funny.
Right. It's like peeking behind the curtain of the English language. So let's get started. This first batch of phrases is all about experiences and perspectives, and I think Vanessa's got a real knack for capturing those feelings we all have. She kicks things off with a classic, which is, there's no place like it.
Yeah, that feeling when a place truly grabs you, you just think, there's no place like this.
Exactly. She talks about the energy of New York City as one example.
Imagine that buzzing energy, the crowds, the lights. You either love it or you hate it. But you gotta admit, there's no place like it. Or maybe for you, it's somewhere completely different.
Ooh, or think about the feeling of coming home after a long trip. There's no place like home, right?
Right, it takes on this whole new meaning. You're like, there's no place like home. It really captures that sense of comfort and belonging.
Totally. Now, this next phrase is a little deeper. It's a position of privilege. And Vanessa and her husband, Dan, often use this when they're talking about travel, being able to see the world.
Well, and for Americans especially, being able to travel abroad comes with all sorts of advantages, things many people around the world just don't have.
You mean like having the money to travel in the first place, or being able to get time off work?
Exactly, yeah. A position of privilege makes us think about those opportunities we have and appreciate them. But it also acknowledges that those opportunities aren't available to everyone.
I see. So it's a reminder to be a little more humble and responsible when we talk about our travel experiences.
Right, because those experiences are shaped by factors beyond our control, and not everyone has the same advantages. Okay, now let's lighten things up a bit with a phrase I bet you've used a million times. I cannot imagine.
Oh, yeah.
But Vanessa points out that when you really emphasize cannot, it just hits different.
Like, try it both ways. I can't imagine. Versus, I cannot imagine. You hear the difference.
It's like adding an exclamation point, right? It just amps up the feeling. And Vanessa gives this hilarious example of using this phrase to talk about French cheek-kissing greetings.
Oh, I've heard about that.
Yeah. She's like, I cannot imagine this happening in the U.S.
Yeah.
Because it's just so different from the typical greetings we do here.
I can totally relate to that. I'm more of a hugger myself, and figuring out how to greet people in other countries is always interesting, to say the least.
Oh, I bet. It can definitely catch you off guard. Speaking of things that can catch you off guard, let's move on to social awareness, which is especially important when you're traveling. Vanessa uses the phrase faux pas for this.
Faux pas, I love that word.
I know, right? It perfectly describes those little social blunders we all make, especially when we're in unfamiliar settings. Come on, we've all been there. Maybe you accidentally wore white to a wedding or used the wrong fork at a fancy dinner.
Or maybe it was a little more, shall we say, international. Like Vanessa and Dan tell the story about Dan asking for a fork and knife at a restaurant in Korea before they felt comfortable using chopsticks.
Uh-huh. Yeah, that's a great example. And it's a funny story, but it really highlights how even well-intentioned actions can come across totally differently in other cultures.
Yeah, being aware of potential faux pas can make your travels a lot smoother. It's like having a secret decoder ring for social situations. Okay, what about those times when you realize you were totally wrong about something? Vanessa gives us two phrases for that. I must say, and I gotta admit.
I must say, or I gotta admit, those are great for when you're shifting your perspective. Like when you try a new food for the first time and you're like, I must say, this is surprisingly good.
I love how I gotta admit just sounds so natural and conversational.
Yeah. And Vanessa points out that it's actually short for I have got to admit, which we often shorten when we're speaking.
You see, this is why I love these deep dives. It's not just about learning new words, it's about understanding those little nuances, how people actually use them in real life.
Yeah, I totally agree. Those little details can make a big difference in how you come across and how effectively you communicate.
All right, are you ready for the next theme?
Definitely. I'm loving these conversational gems.
Okay, we're back and ready to unlock even more of these essential English phrases with Vanessa. This next set is all about adapting and observing, which, those are pretty crucial skills, right?
For sure, especially when you're in new places or around people from different backgrounds.
Absolutely. And Vanessa kicks things off with a phrase that really highlights our ability to, adjust to things, even when they're challenging, to get used to.
It's interesting because she uses it to talk about something that a lot of people find difficult, like getting used to that constant city noise after living in the quiet countryside.
Oh, yeah, I can see that.
But she makes this point that even though it's tough at first, we humans are pretty amazing at adapting.
It's like that saying, what doesn't kill you makes you stronger. But maybe in this case, it's more like, what doesn't drive you crazy makes you more adaptable.
Haha, exactly. And it's not just noise, right? Think about any time you've had to adjust to something new. A new job, a new school, even a new relationship. It might be weird at first, but eventually you get used to it.
Yeah, you gotta settle in. That's actually really reassuring, especially for someone like me who loves to travel but sometimes gets overwhelmed by new experiences.
It's all about giving yourself that time to adjust.
Huh?
Okay, now this next phrase, to be able to tell, might seem pretty simple on the surface.
Yeah, you can tell something.
Right. But Vanessa uses it in a way that's actually really insightful.
Oh, how so?
Well, she talks about how she could tell people were reacting differently to her American accent when she was traveling abroad, even if they didn't say anything directly.
Ah, I see. So it's more like sensing something.
Exactly. It's not about someone telling her something, but her being able to kind of pick up on these subtle cues. Maybe a change in their tone or body language.
Like using her observation skills as a sixth sense.
Totally. And it made her feel self-conscious
Yeah.
because she realized that in those moments, she was kind of representing her whole country.
Ooh, I can definitely relate to that feeling. You know, when you're in a new place and you feel like you're being judged or stereotyped, it's
Mm.
like you're carrying all this cultural baggage with you, whether you want to or not.
Yeah, I think we've all been there at some point. Okay, so that actually leads us perfectly into our next theme, which is opinions and assumptions. And Vanessa starts with a phrase that we often use to acknowledge our own, well, subjective views, to be biased.
Oh, yeah, we all have our biases.
And I love that she gives this funny example. Dan compliments her, and she playfully responds with, well, you're biased, because he's her husband, so of course he's going to say nice things.
Of course, but it's a good point, though, because it shows how our personal experiences can influence our opinions, even when we're trying to be objective.
For sure. Our upbringing, our values, our beliefs, it all shapes how we see the world.
So it's not necessarily a bad thing to be biased.
Not at all. Sometimes our biases can give us unique perspectives.
Yeah.
The key is being aware of them so they don't, cloud our judgment or prevent us from seeing things clearly.
That makes sense. And Vanessa brings up a really important example of this, which is bias in the news.
It's so easy to get caught up in only reading or watching things that confirm what we already believe, but they can create a really distorted view of reality.
Yeah.
It's so important to seek out different perspectives and challenge our own assumptions.
Yeah, for sure. Okay, get ready for this next phrase because it's a good one. No one in their right mind.
No one in their right mind. I love that one.
It's so expressive, when you hear something and you just think, that's ridiculous.
Uh-huh. Yeah, or like, this is so crazy, it's almost funny.
And Dan uses it to talk about something that's a real frustration in the U.S., which is, the lack of walkability in a lot of cities. He's like, no one in their right mind would walk from this store to this store because it's so dangerous for pedestrians.
And it's funny because it's true. It's like a commentary on, I don't know, maybe our car-centric culture or something.
It really makes you think, right? Like, why are things designed that way? What assumptions are we making about how people should live and move around?
Those are some really good questions. And it's interesting to think about how those assumptions might be different in other cultures.
Totally. Okay, before we wrap things up, we have to talk about the bonus round phrase. This one's all about being open to new experiences, like bring it on. And the phrase is to be game for.
I love to be game for. It's just so casual and versatile. Like you can use it for anything, trying new food, going on an adventure, even just, having a conversation with someone you've never met before.
And it just rolls off the tongue, right? Like, sure, I'm game for anything.
Exactly. And both Vanessa and Dan use it in the video. And you can just feel that positive, open-minded energy. It's like saying, hey, I'm up for whatever.
All right, listeners, we're going to take a quick break. Well, while we do, we want you to think about this. What English phrases have you picked up from different places or experiences? Maybe it's a slang term you learned from a friend or a funny saying you heard while traveling. We'll be back soon to wrap things up and hear your thoughts. We're back, and wow, I gotta say, I'm feeling so much more confident about using all these phrases in my own conversations.
Me too. It's amazing how a few well-chosen words can really make a difference.
Totally. So, as we wrap up this deep dive, I'm curious what resonated with you the most. Any phrases that sparked a memory or maybe even a funny story from your own life?
Yeah. What about you? What stood out?
Hmm. Well, I keep thinking about a position of privilege. It's just such a good reminder to be grateful for what we have and to think about others who might not have the same opportunities.
Yeah, that's a good one. It really makes you think about those bigger systems at play and how we can use our own privilege to help others.
And on a later note, I really enjoyed Vanessa's story about the whole cheek kissing thing in France.
Oh, yeah, that culture shock.
It reminded me of this time when, well, let's just say I once accidentally hugged someone who was definitely not expecting it.
Oh, no.
Yeah.
I can only imagine. It's funny, those awkward moments really highlight how cultural differences can lead to all sorts of misunderstandings.
Oh, for sure, but that's part of the fun, right? Embracing those differences and, learning to navigate them.
Absolutely. And I think Dan's comment about walkability in U.S. cities was interesting, too, because it shows how language can reflect those different cultural priorities and values.
It's funny because his statement, no one in their right mind would walk from this store to this store. It could be seen as a complaint, but it's also kind of a call for change.
Right. It's like he's saying, this is how it is, but it doesn't have to be this way. It's a reminder that we can actually shape our environments and make them more, I don't know, user-friendly for everyone.
Exactly. So as we wrap up our time with Vanessa, I think the biggest takeaway for me is that language is so much more than just words. It really reflects our experiences, our values, our whole worldview.
Yeah, I agree. And the more we pay attention to those little nuances of language, the better we can understand ourselves and the people around us.
So keep exploring those nuances. Pay attention to the phrases you hear in movies, in songs, in everyday conversations. Ask questions, be curious, and most importantly, have fun with it.
Because at the end of the day, language is all about connecting with others, sharing our stories, and building relationships.
Well said. Until next time, everyone, keep learning and keep practicing your English.